Zateo's documentary executive producer, Dion Nussbaum, outlining that there's two major revelations in this documentary in terms of the killing of Shireen Abu Akleh and the Biden administration's involvement in basically the supposed investigation that was done into her killing. Let's play this clip.
We welcome you all to Democracy Now! Diane, we're going to begin with you. This is the third anniversary, May 11th exactly, of the death of Shireen Abu Akleh. Talk about your revelation, what you exposed in this documentary.
Well, there are two things that were very important for the documentary. The first thing was we wanted to find the soldier who killed Shireen. It had been one of the most closely guarded secrets in Israel. U.S. officials said that if they wanted to determine if there was a crime here, if there was a human rights violation, they needed to talk to this soldier to find out what he was thinking when he shot her. And we set out to find him, and we did. We did what the U.S. government never did. And it turned out he had been killed, so we were never able to answer that question, what he was thinking. But the other revelation that I think is as significant in this documentary is that the initial U.S. assessment of her shooting was that that soldier intentionally shot her, and that he could tell that she was wearing a blue flak jacket with press across it. That assessment was essentially overruled by the Biden administration, which came out and said exactly the opposite. That's a fairly startling revelation that the Biden administration and the Israeli government essentially were doing everything they could to cover up what happened that day to Shireen Abu Akleh.
So if you'll recall, Shireen Abu Akleh was the Palestinian journalist who was killed, and this was a major. Obviously, this is before October 7th. We should add. This was years ago, and there was an investigation into her killing because she was clearly wearing, in everything we saw of her prior work and the photographs that came out that day, that she was clearly wearing identifying press gear, a uniform that clearly identified her as press. And it appears, based on this investigation that the Zateo documentary has performed, everything we've heard about the IDF soldier who shot and killed her, not knowing she was press, is frankly bullshit, which what we know now after years now of this genocide in Gaza, and what has since come out about the Biden administration flat out misrepresenting and frankly outright lying their role, or what I should say, their non-existent role in apparently advocating for a ceasefire in Gaza in their non-existent negotiations with Israel, shouldn't come as a surprise now that we know all of this about just how the Biden administration viewed, frankly, every single thing that Israel did in Gaza as, I guess in their view, above the board and A-OK, regardless of whatever the investigation actually laid out factually.
It's important to emphasize how deeply genocidal this Biden administration was. Like you said, Binder, the initial reports was, and even calls from American spokespeople saying Israel needs to prosecute the people who murdered her to the fullest extent. And then Blinken gets involved, and over the course of several weeks, initially calls for an independent investigation. And then a few weeks later, his language changes a little bit, despite him lying through his teeth, starting the statement saying, "There has been no change in our approach. We continue to call for a thorough, credible investigation that culminates in accountability." So they went from calling for saying Israel needs to prosecute that guy to, oh, we need an investigation to figure out what happened on an independent one, to, okay, Israel can do the investigation, but it just needs to be a thorough one. How fucking stupid do they think people are? I mean, right. And obviously this was pre-October 7th. This is how Zionists operate, like Blinken and Sullivan and those sorts of folks. This is a crime of the century. All these people should be in fucking prison.
Right. No, but what you brought up is an excellent point, and I think people should. I don't think people are stupid, but I do think there are people who don't have media literacy sometimes, and they don't notice the changes in this case, the changes in language that completely changes what Biden's position on this was. The call from an investigation to, his term was like a credible or thorough
credible,
a thorough, credible investigation. The change in language there is very important, because what that points to is that things were coming out in an investigation, even if it was a preliminary investigation, that did not toe what Israel and the Biden administration's line was going to be, or what they had hoped to be the truth, or what they wanted the truth to, what their version of the truth to be. And once that comes out, they add that thorough and credible investigation line, not only to call for a different type of investigation, but to subtly claim that the stuff we've already heard in an investigation can't be true because it wasn't thorough or it wasn't credible enough. It's poking holes in what people are hearing in terms of on the ground reports and whatever preliminary investigation or full investigation or whatever was already being done. It's to demean and basically deny the facts on the ground in order to hope that people fall for it. And, again, I don't think people are stupid, but there are people who are susceptible to that stuff, and that's why they do it. They wouldn't do it if it wasn't successful.
It's a running the clock out thing. It's just like people don't pay super close attention, and they can be snowed. But over the course of time, look at polling on this issue. You can't fool people this much. You can't do a genocide. I mean, this is post-October 7, but you can't just have journalists being shot and then say, well, it's actually nuanced. We need to hear all sides on this. No, we need to stop covering for Israel. It's as simple as that.
Right. I mean, and we should add, this was targeted. It wasn't like she was in a group of people, which wouldn't be okay either. But then they would be able to argue that this was targeted. She was shot and killed in a targeted, frankly, assassination.
Yeah. He said armed with a camera was the Israeli, some Israeli official said she was armed with a camera.
Yeah. I mean, and I think they've been very clear that they feel like journalists are part of the, Hamas war effort because they accurately document the crimes that they are committing in Gaza, which paints them in a negative light, which we've seen, both in their domestic policy, in their foreign policy, in their sort of like apartheid policy, as well as the United States domestic policy. It is treated almost like an act of war if you contradict the official narrative of what's going on in Israel with the Palestinian genocide. And I should also say, the thorough and credible investigation to me signals that they want the investigation to at least look reasonable as well, because, part of this is also to pretend as though Israel has the capacity to police itself, that Israel has the capacity as a, brutal ethno-nationalist apartheid state to police its own excesses when it comes to the displacement, ethnic cleansing, and genocide of Palestinians, not just because that's part of our mythology around Israel and ourselves, but also because it's key to ensuring that Israel prior to October 7th was going to, not be subject to outside investigations by the by the UN for not doing these kinds of investigations in a credible and thorough manner, because they would be violating the complementarity clause. Because if you're not actually investigating things that look like human rights violations or war crimes in your country, then the UN is much more likely to get involved. Not that the UN we see will do anything if things continue, but prior to October 7th and the continued genocide, the UN investigation looking into it would have probably shown something that was less, like Biden was afraid of, less flattering to the Israeli narrative.
Now, let's be real. It's not just Israel. I mean, Israel is the country we most egregiously cover for. But now I just blanked on his name. The guy who got bone-sawed in Saudi Arabia, journalist Khashoggi. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It'll always.
No,
how like, and this is especially egregious with Saudi Arabia, especially being that all these corporations now are getting in bed with them as they seek out to paint the country as the Saudi kingdom seek to paint the country in a more positive light, and all these companies that are totally like rah about patriotism and never forget 9/11, and then they're getting taking Saudi money. It's amazing to me, that one especially.
Well, I mean, I think we have to also acknowledge that Israel is used to obfuscate the reality of the United States of America's like foreign policy. Like we try to frame Israel in a certain way because it benefits a larger narrative that we have about like the United States' aims in the region, which is also why we try to like obscure our relationship with actors in the region who we aren't able to portray as easily as like a real democracy with liberal values, like the Qataris or like the Saudis. And so like that also helps Israel in the end because they get to pretend by nature of the fact that like, well, there's they get to seem that they are some kind of special democracy. And that's why America supports them. But if people were fully aware of like the context of who America supports, both openly and secretly around the world, it would paint Israel and our support for Israel in a negative light because it would be like, America loves to support dictatorships. America has never found like a brutal military junta that it didn't want to support. It's like and Israel doesn't want to be portrayed in that light too. It really is a very codependent relationship in ways that like when you don't like have the full picture, oftentimes just give rise to anti-Semitic tropes that people want to believe and are much more pervasive in our society than people like to admit.
Right. Well, you can't compare Israel to an authoritarian dictatorship, Brandon, because they're the only democracy in the Middle East, of course, as we've heard over and over again. And, only democracy in the Middle East, but also can't let in too many Arabs or Palestinians or Muslims because they might vote to change the political body of Israel. So we can't do that in the only democracy in the Middle East. But great point.
Don't you just love democracy and how
I love it?
Yeah, I love
it.
Standing for democracy is we allow a democracy to mass murder and starve a people. It's cool. Democracy is great.
Right. Well, as long as people of Israel voted for it.
Yeah, I mean, Palestinians voted for Hamas 15 or so years ago, or 20 years ago. But whatever. Yeah, I guess some elections don't have consequences.
Hey, folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.